correspondent from Chicago said, "You know this country, Colonel?"
"Yes," said Chedrick. "I know it."
He was tallying his regiment as a poker player would consider the laws of chance in a deck of cards. He had 500 men, half of them good soldiers, half of them recruits from Jefferson Barracks. He had a set of tough non-coms, the backbone of his command. He had some good officers. He had a few who were green. He had some who were the sweepings of the Civil War. He had only one major, this Major Khan, who rode heavy and choleric beside him, with a mind blurred by drink. Callahan, his senior captain, was half wild from slowness of promotion and might, in a pinch, throw away 50 men for the sake of making a reputation. Somewhere out in front of him, the Sioux moved restlessly back and forth, stirred by their war chiefs and armed with repeating rifles which were better than the carbines of his own command. This was how Chedrick weighed his orders, the ability of his regiment, the enemy in front. This was what command meant, this insistent consideration of 100 changing elements. At 62, it was a burden which added 50 pounds to his body and kept him awake at night and formed his mouth into a long, thin line. It was a thing you couldn't tell anybody. It was something only an old man knew, after years of experience. At 10 o'clock, the full heat of the sun burned against exposed skin and flashed on metal gear, and dust rolled around them in cloudy billows. The advance guard rode a mile ahead. A line of flankers moved far out to either side of the column, and thus the regiment marched, a complete and self-contained unit on the face of emptiness. For a while during that morning, Gibson's command had been a low streak in the north. Now that was gone. Behind him, the column slowly came alive from its morning's taciturnity. Men were talking, men were laughing. Down in F Troop, Jack Studenberg said, "How does a woman get along when a man's away, I wonder?" Corporal Knipe said, "There's other men." "Now," grumbled Studenberg, "I could cut your heart out for putting the thought in my mind." He looked at Kistmiller in the file closers. "How you betting on that baby, Sarge?" "A boy," answered Kistmiller, and said no more. Behind him, the column began to sing, and Chedrick, listening to it, felt pleased. He liked his men to sweat and eat dust and grow lank-muscled and quarrelsome, because that meant they had the vital salt of soldiering in them. He liked them to sing, for in singing he felt them pulled together. He caught the unity and the single will of the command. Chedrick sent his scout detail into the southeast and listened to the reports on returning. At noon, the command halted beside Lost Warrior Creek on the treeless plain, and was in motion again by 1. 50 minutes of march and 10 for rest, on through the piled-up haze, through a thin air and a furnace-blast heat, through a dust that collected on eyebrows in white drifts and stung the nostrils and settled as grit between shirt collar and flesh. Chedrick sent the details out one by one. They curled into the southeast and came back with their little sums of information, and at 7 o'clock the regiment reached the major fork of Lost Warrior Creek and camped with the shadow of low hills 15 miles ahead. Cook fires burned pure yellow triangles into the enveloping dusk. The wagon train etched a broken line against the horizon, and men, bone-tired, murmured and lay still. The crunch of feeding horses, the tramp of the sentries, the shine of lanterns, all these small details came to Chedrick as he sat under the fly of his tent and debated with the civilian guide. "They're coming out of the north and east," he said, "and meeting somewhere to the south." The civilian guide said, "Beyond the second bunch of hills, there's a couple of high ridges with a valley and Ash Creek flowing between. It's been a meeting spot of the Sioux for as long as I can remember." "In considerable numbers," reflected the colonel. "They've got their women along?" "They'll fight if you surprise 'em, 'cause they've got their women." "How many would you guess?" "Big party. Maybe 1,000, maybe 2. Coolness stirred on the desert. Chedrick went into the tent and sat before the camp table, writing a letter to his wife. It was his lifelong habit to write something each evening when on campaign, so that when his wife got the letters back at Fort Lincoln, she would have the daily story. He wrote in a heavy, flowing hand, and folded the letter and returned to the camp chair under the fly to catch some of the evening's coolness. Silence came to the camp, and 500 men were sleeping, or lying awake with their memories and their dreams, and all these men's lives rested on